History Channel. Welcome to our Sunday live stream lecture. We do this every Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern, where we discuss a particular historical topic that you guys have voted on, and you guys voted for the Crusades, and it's a topic I've covered before on a live stream lecture, but I'm willing to do it again, as some people were asking about different types of crusades. So I'm going to cover the first 5 crusades. The first 4 ones are the major crusades that we know about in European history. They're obviously the holy wars of the Christians against the Muslims, in which they sought to retake the Holy Land or Palestine from different Muslim kingdoms and sultanates who controlled the area. I'll give a little bit of background about why and how this happened. I'll talk about some of the more significant crusades. I'll talk about other crusades that have happened throughout history, how the Europeans eventually turned crusading into an exploit that they did mainly in Europe, and how crusading went from being a Middle Eastern enterprise by the Europeans to a European enterprise, doing everything in their power to, and how they're enterprising in how it became a European enterprise in an attempt to solidify their control, the Catholic Church's control over Western Europe, and how that eventually evolved into other things like the Spanish Inquisition. So I hope you really enjoy that. If you like that kind of topic, consider liking and subscribing. Welcome, a happy Sunday to all of you. I hope you've had a great weekend, and I hope you have a great week ahead. We do these live streams every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. 6 p.m. Eastern, Fridays and Saturdays is our Q&A, and on Sundays at 4 p.m. Eastern, we talk about a particular historical topic that somebody who has given a super chat or a donation to the channel has recommended, or we do a vote on the channel. And you guys voted this weekend, and we went with the I'm blanking. Why am I blanking? We went with the Crusades. An overwhelming majority of you wanted us to do the Crusades. So please join the family, become a friendly neighborhood historian. Liking and subscribing does that, and you can go and vote on the particular topic, and you may see your topic eventually as a live stream lecture. You can follow us on the social medias that my wonderful moderator Hars put in the channel. You can follow us on Instagram, read my articles on Substack, get some early access on Patreon, as well as my First Lady series. Check out my series here, like Roman emperors, British monarchs, U.S. presidents, Russian czars. I'm currently doing a short series on Russian history that I hope you will enjoy. And of course, we have long-form videos every Mondays and Fridays dropping at 8 p.m. Eastern. Check out tomorrow's The Industrial Revolution, one I've been working on for a while and one I think that you'll really enjoy. I'm going to talk about how that entire movement got started. So really looking forward to that. And I'm going to do a background for us today, since the Crusades definitely deserve their own background. Let me see if I've got the right picture, but yeah, I won't be able to see the chat, so hopefully play nice. If there's time at the end, we might do some questions. We don't always do questions, but we will see what we can do. Usually I like questions that are about the live stream lecture topic, so in this case, questions about the Crusades, and we already do Q&As every Friday and Saturday at 6, and usually every Friday on Instagram at 7, all Eastern Standard Time, by the way. But yeah, let me see, that's one I'm definitely going to use, so here's Constantinople. That's Constantinople. I'm definitely going to use that. I'm looking at the different backgrounds I might want to use. There are very definitive pictures and paintings throughout history that depict the Crusades that are extremely important to telling the narrative of them. So, okay, this one looks really good. Okay, we'll go with this one. So, anyways, again, welcome. If this is your first time joining us, I'm glad that you're here. If you're a returning visitor, it's good to see you again. Welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel either way. And if you like history and social studies, consider liking and subscribing and becoming part of our Friendly Neighborhood Historians. There's over 9,200. Our goal is 10,000 by Labor Day. It's a high goal, but I think we can reach it. So let's see. Let me turn on, make sure that I got all the messages coming in on the chat. But yes, so obviously the medieval era, the period of the Middle Ages, dominates Europe between the fall of the Roman Empire and the rise of the Renaissance in the 15th century. So for about 1,000 years, Western Europe kind of goes through the growing pains of developing its own civilization. Yes, I will be covering that, Kaihan. The Western Europe goes through its metamorphosis, in which Christianity becomes the dominant social force in the area. Roman Catholicism spreads both through missionaries and through the sword. Different Christian kings will conquer certain areas and then force their subjects to become Christian. Other people will embrace Christianity willingly, thanks to saints in the Catholic Church, like St. Patrick goes to Ireland, and St. Augustine of Canterbury establishes the English Church at Canterbury. That's why the Archbishop of Canterbury is the highest role in the English Church to this day. Charlemagne obviously spreads Christianity in the Germanic areas, usually by force. There are certain areas of Europe that are not Christian that will be in certain resistance to the Catholic Christianity in Western Europe that the Crusades will actually target. The Crusades weren't just a onslaught of holy campaigns against the Muslims, although that's the usual target of Christian animosity, it also targeted other groups of people that we will discuss today. So I hope you really enjoy that. And if you do, again, like and subscribe. So the Middle Ages is kind of this growing and adjusting period for Christian Europe, where we see a huge change. 1,000 years of history go by, and as the time, it's not even called Europe, it's called Christendom. The role of the church is obviously important. There's a constant battle between secular authorities, kings and dukes and nobles, and their place and their position in relationship to the Catholic Church. Obviously, the Pope and his bishops and cardinals seek to establish as much control over the different areas that they oversee as possible, hoping to have having as much sacred control over both the sacred and secular realms, while secular leaders seek to have their own kind of independence from that. And this leads to many clashes with many different entities throughout the Middle Ages. And so obviously, the Catholic Church becomes the most dominant social force. It's the most unifying feature in Europe at this time, because the only real form of Christianity that is practiced in Europe is Catholic Christianity. So whether it's in Italy, which is a series of different individual states, the Papal States is its own kingdom, actually. So the Pope acts as both a lord, a noble overseeing an area, and as a spiritual authority. You also, of course, have France, which develops from the Frankish and the Gauls and different Celtic groups that eventually form the Kingdom of France, that really sees its first formations and development in the late 8th century under the Merovingians, or the Carolingians, and of course their greatest ruler is Charlemagne. Charlemagne divides his kingdom between 3 different sons, and there's a West Francia, Central Francia, and East Francia. The eastern area eventually becomes more or less the German entity during that time, called the Holy Roman Empire. And at first it's a dynasty of rulers, but eventually it will be an elected position. So you have the Holy Roman Empire, which is more or less Germany and some other areas as well. You have a development of France as a kingdom. Most of Spain is still controlled by the Muslims, and there's a series of crusades in Spain to actually help the Christians defeat the Muslims and take more and more control of the Iberian Peninsula away from the various Muslim authorities. So that's obviously important. We'll get to that. England develops. At first, it's conquered by the Anglo-Saxons. Viking invasions continue, but after the 1066 Norman conquest, England basically becomes tied to European affairs and tied to the European continent. There's a lot, obviously, that happens there that's really important. But basically, you have the Holy Roman Empire in what is mostly Germany. You have the French, and you have the English. The English kings own a significant portion of land in France until the 15th century. And those are some of the principal kingdoms and principalities that interact with the Pope. There are other Italian states that interact with the Pope. And obviously in the East, you have a Byzantine Empire. So the Byzantine Empire is the descendants of the Eastern Roman Empire that did not collapse in 476 like the West, but stayed on and continued to consider themselves Romans until their eventual collapse in 1453 at the hands of the Ottoman Turks. The Byzantines, the Christianity in the West and East start to divide more and more as the centuries go on, with the East being a Greek-speaking church with many of the most ancient sites in Christianity originating there, and with centralized religious authority being in Rome. The Western church develops differently. It speaks Latin. And so as the centuries go on, there's a growing divide between the Greek-speaking Eastern church and the West-speaking Latin church. And eventually we get, obviously, the development of Catholicism in the West and Orthodoxy, Greek Orthodoxy in the East. The appointment of Charlemagne as the king of the Romans, which basically implies his right to rule over the Romans. It's bringing back and reviving the Roman Empire after 3 centuries of collapse by Pope, I think it was Leo III in 800, which is kind of an unofficial thing, but that's what it implies. Severely angers the Byzantine empress, I believe her name is Irene, who believes that that for centuries the only real Roman emperor still had been the emperor in the East. So political conflagrations, the rise of Christian kingdoms in Europe that are supported by and support the papacy usually, and of course the continual division between the Latin-speaking West and the Greek-speaking East is going to cause more and more tension between the Roman Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church in the East. And although they are still one entity, the East is starting to become more and more weary of the Pope trying to involve himself and express his authority over the eastern parts of the church. So you have a Western Catholic Church developing, and you have the Eastern Orthodox Church developing. And in 1054, one of the most important moments in European history, the Catholic representative to the Orthodox patriarch excommunicates him, says that he's a heretic, and then the Orthodox patriarch excommunicates the Catholic bishop, and this leads to what's called the Great Schism, where the Western Church will become the Catholic Church, and that'll be the dominant force in Europe, the dominant religious force in Europe for the next 5 centuries, and the Eastern Church will become the Orthodox Church, which obviously will eventually spread into areas like Russia. So you get the Russian Orthodox, the Ukrainian Orthodox, the Bulgarian Orthodox, meant a lot of national churches in Eastern Orthodoxy. Greek Orthodoxy is obviously very important. So the Byzantine Empire, there's a schism between the two churches, so now there's a divide within the Christian church, and you have Christendom, which is what Europe was called at this time, because it is these kings believe that they are subject, at least officially, these kings believe they are subject to the authority of Christ and to the authority of the Pope. Whereas the East feels that it is subject to the authority of the Eastern Roman Emperor and to the patriarchs and to a conciliar agreement between the different bishops of their different churches. So whereas the Pope starts to centralize more and more authority for himself in the West, the East is going to be more of a confederacy of bishops with several different leaders, and of course the Roman Emperor, the Eastern Roman Emperor, having a lot of influence and power as well. And I'm sorry I'm not greeting everybody. It's good to see all of you. I hope you're enjoying your Sunday. Welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel and to our live stream lecture where I am discussing the Crusades. I'm giving a little bit of background now, and I hope you all really enjoy that. I hope you're enjoying your Sunday. Grab something nice to eat or to drink and buckle up. We've got a ways to go, but maybe we'll have a little bit of Q&A at the end. So yeah, and the background goes hard. This is medieval fighting. We're talking about medieval Europe and the development of the medieval kingdoms that eventually form some of the most important parts of the Crusades. So the Byzantines have been in speaking of the Byzantines, they have been in a series of, or Eastern Romans, they have been in serious decline over the last couple of centuries. They have been at odds with the Bulgarian Empire in the north, but they also were at odds with the growing incursions of the Muslims. So Islam is formed in the 7th century. The Prophet Muhammad dies supposedly in 632, and after his death, his followers, a series of 4 leaders, or is it 5 leaders? I'm always forgetting. Oh, thank you so much. IC gave a super chat. That always helps the channel. I really, really appreciate that. Why did the Patriarch Byzantine beg the Pope for military support to push back the Seljuk Muslim Turkish expansion? Great question, IC. I will get to that and answer that in detail. Really appreciate that. So a super chat is able to stop me and get me to pay attention. But I'm going to talk about that because this lecture is all about the Crusades. So I really appreciate that, IC. I think it's the first time I've ever seen you. So welcome. I'm going to get to that, I promise. Islam in the next century conquers all of North Africa, Spain, almost all of the Middle East, and huge sections of Eastern Anatolia, Syria, and of course the Levant, including Palestine or the Holy Land, taking the Holy Land away from Byzantine Christians and giving it to the Muslims. Obviously, Alaska and the Dome of the Rock are some of the most important religious sites. It's one of the most important religious sites in Islam because it is supposedly where Muhammad took the night journey, went to heaven, and was able to meet with God, to see Allah face to face, and all of that stuff. So this is built on the Temple Mount, where the Second Temple was destroyed by the Romans in about 70 AD. So obviously there's a lot of kind of tension between Jews, Christians, and Muslims, although Jews at this time are heavily persecuted in Europe and are considered to be Christ killers. A lot of the stereotypes and anti-Semitism that we see that is perpetuated for the last 1,000 years actually develops in this medieval crusading period, believe it or not. For instance, crusaders who were going off to war and needed to take out loans for money, Christians could not charge interest, but Jewish bankers could charge interest because they weren't following Christian laws. And so the idea of Jews being greedy and money lenders and things like that all comes from that Crusader period when they believed that the Jews were charging them exorbitant amounts of interest to loan money for their military campaigns. True story. That's where that stereotype comes from. Many times Jews were assaulted, their synagogues were burned, and many of their people were killed in different European cities because they were considered to be infidels. An infidel is just a name that means heretic, someone who denied. It's originally a Muslim term, but it comes to mean something amongst the Christians too. It is anyone who rejects the truth. And so Christians would apply this, Western Crusaders would apply this to the Muslims, but also to the Jews and to the Byzantines at one point, and that's what leads to the disastrous Fourth Crusade that I'll talk about later. So, but the Muslims conquer all of that area. The caliphate falls apart in 661. The Umayyads appear as the major caliphate. They fall apart in the early 700s. They take over Spain, and the Abbasids emerge, and they're going to be one of the most powerful entities. This is the Islamic Golden Age, a time of great learning, philosophical, scientific, and mathematical developments in the Islamic world. This starts to stall in the 11th century. The Abbasid dynasty loses a lot of its power. The caliphate isn't what it used to be, and new, more powerful Muslim groups will emerge, including the Seljuk Turks, who help convert the Turkish people to Islam, and they are going to take over a huge swath of the Middle East, including the Holy Land, and they are going to consistently try to seize all of Anatolia or modern-day Turkey and take it away from the Byzantines, who have controlled it for centuries. Muslim incursions, such as their great victory at Manzikert in 1071 against the Byzantines, humiliate the Byzantines. Christian pilgrims start to experience more and more harassment from Muslim military officials. And Muslim raiders as they make pilgrimages and holy journeys to Jerusalem. Muslims had understood this for a long time. Obviously, the Hajj is one of the pillars of Islam. Muslims are required to go to Mecca at least once in their life, to go to the Kaaba. But the Seljuks, being a bit more brutish, do not understand this, or at least do not care, and start to harass and rob and kidnap Christian pilgrims headed towards Jerusalem. This obviously angers Christians. This includes Orthodox Byzantine Christians, but it also includes Catholic Christians coming from all the way from Europe. There is an alliance between the papacy and the Byzantines. There is some hope that they will eventually get back together. It's actually the Crusades that will drive a further wedge between the Byzantines in the east and the Western Catholics, Christian European kingdoms known as Christendom at the time. And yes, good to see all of you. Harry's here, Solomon's here, and Hars is here. Show some love to my moderators. They do such a good job handling. And if you have questions or comments you want to make, they will be handling it right now because I'm a bit in the middle of the lecture. But basically what happens next is I'm trying to remember the name of which Byzantine emperor. Was it Maximilian or is Maximus or something? I think it started with an M. In the late 11th century, this problem is starting to really irritate Christians in the West, and so the Byzantine emperor approaches the Catholic Pope, a man named Urban II, and demands that in order to stop the harassment of Christian pilgrims, Christian holy sites, and their incursions against the Byzantines, to stop the aggressive Muslim tactics Islam had conquered that entire region to begin with, and to retake the land that originally belonged to the Lord for his glory, there needs to be a holy war against the Muslims. And so eventually the Pope, with the Byzantine emperor present at the French city of Clermont, decides that this is the right decision, saying Deus vult, or Deus vult. Actually, in Latin, V is W in ancient Latin. Most Latin that you have heard, by the way, is Church Latin, coming from Latin Catholic origins, which isn't actually the ancient Latin spoken by the Romans. But it's the same language, but there's a lot of difference in pronunciation and some spellings and things like that. But Deus vult, God wills it, God wants this to happen. And so Urban II mobilizes Christians, sending out the call to take up the cross. And soldiers, in order to show that they are going to do this, they will paint the cross, usually in red, on their shields, on their banners that they put over their horses, on their standard bearers, on their flags, on their tunics, and so to show that they are fighting for the Lord. So taking up the cross is a reference to the New Testament, where Jesus says, if anyone wants to follow me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow. Or if anyone... I forget exactly how he says it, but basically it's the idea of sacrificing yourself for the Lord. Now, there were many crusaders who got involved in this because they saw the ability to gain vast amounts of riches, wealth, and power by going to the Holy Land and conquering it. Obviously, the French are at the forefront of this. The Crusades start with the French, and so the French are going to be the ones who are maybe the main actors in most, if not all, of the major Crusades. So there are French nobles. Some kings take it up, but the First Crusade is mainly going to be major nobles like Geoffrey of Boulogne, and of course, I'm trying to remember his name. He was a Norman. I think it's Robert. He's the Duke of Normandy, and he's the son of William the Conqueror, and he will go on crusade. His brother is the King of England, William II, who is the son of William the Conqueror, who engaged in the Norman conquest. And while he is away setting up his Crusader states, his brother Henry will take over when William II dies. So that causes a succession crisis in England when there's Geoffrey of Boulogne and Robert Robert, the Duke of Normandy. They will gather an army of French troops. There's some Germans. I think the Archduke of Austria gets involved. There's Italian soldiers. So there's soldiers all over the place, but there are many nobles that lead it, and many of them are French. Can the Pope today declare a new crusade? Thank you again, Felix. I think he technically could, but it would just meet with so much bitter taste in so many people's mouths that it wouldn't go anywhere. It's become very, very much trite or out of date to want to declare a new crusade. But basically, the desire to conquer, the desire for glory, the desire to please God and to retake his land is huge for these crusaders. Another thing that's huge is the promise that the church gives. So according to Catholic theology, human beings, when they die, Christians are not guaranteed to enter heaven immediately. They will go through, many of them will go through a purifying state where some of the punishments for their sins will be, their temporal punishments as they are called, will be meted to them in an intermediate place called purgatory, where they're supposed to be completely purified, purge, purgatorium, so that they can go into heaven and be with the Lord. So there is a Catholic system called indulgences. Indulgences basically knock one of these out. So a plenary indulgence knocks out temporal punishments for sins. So it would allow a Catholic Christian soldier, if he fights in a crusade, it would give him an opportunity to skip purgatory, or at least skip some of it, and go directly to heaven. I don't know if it's a complete full pardon, but it's a pardon for at least some sins, or punishment of sins. It's not that you can do whatever you want, from what I understand. But this is a huge incentive to the Catholic population of Europe, which has become accustomed to needing to work hard to expiate their sins, either through almsgiving, service to the church, or suffering. And this is another way to serve the church. So the vast majority of crusading leaders probably had the motives of power, glory, and conquering for Christ. But a lot of people who fought in the Crusades, the normal men-at-arms, as soldiers were often called, these fellows, were fighting more or less because they believed that God wanted them to do it, that it would glorify God if they did it, and that they would be rewarded by the Lord if they ended up doing it. So there's distractions on both sides. But that's where the basic idea by the Catholic Christians in Europe comes from. They are doing this, and in doing this, they are pleasing God, and that God will reward them for their journeys and for their struggles. So we enter the First Crusade. Now, I've done a live stream lecture on this before. I've done videos about the Crusades. I've talked about the Crusades. I have an entire short series on the Crusades. I'm not going to rush through it, but I'm going to explain it relatively quickly because there's a lot of other things I want to talk about. So starts in 1095, really gets going 1096, 1097. It makes a difficult excursion. They reconquer several areas of Anatolia, having to go through Anatolia. Constantinople is one of the main ports that they arrive in and then go through there. Later, they'll go through Cyprus and other areas to try to get to the Holy Land. But they're actually able to win some victories in Anatolia, and then eventually, but their main targets are areas in modern-day Syria, then the Levant, including places like Odessa, Antioch, and of course Jerusalem is their ultimate target, believing that they not only will create a new path for Christian pilgrims, they will be able to overthrow the Seljuks and retake the holy city where the Lord Jesus Christ was killed and rose again. From their perspective, this is what they're going for, most of them. Could it be a mix of certain things? Absolutely. Humans always have multiple motives. But there are commonly there's one or two things that I hear when I look at the historiography, the historical debate about the Crusades. It's either greedy Europeans just slaughtering innocent poor Muslims, or it's justified men doing what the Lord would want and killing those dirty Muslims. Both of those perspectives are overblown nonsense. There's always a mix somewhere in the middle there. So the Christians win Battle of Dorylaeum, Siege of Antioch, win some major victories in surprising fashion. They are usually outnumbered. They do not understand the terrain of the desert. These men are carrying heavy armor. They're usually at an inconvenience, and their forces have to be pretty improvised from battle to battle. Eventually, they reach Jerusalem, and surprisingly, once again, they're dealing with a much larger Seljuk force. The Seljuks are on their home territory, and the Seljuks have proven their ability to defeat the Byzantines over and over again. The Byzantines, by the way, have some falling outs with the crusading leaders and pull a lot of their support. So the Crusaders are doing it on their own. Most of these men from France and the Holy Roman Empire are fighting on their own to retake the holy city of Jerusalem from the Muslims. So for the Muslims, this is their holy city too, so it's obviously extremely important for what's going on. This is a huge battle at the siege of Jerusalem, and the Crusaders actually successfully pulled it off. I think it took them a couple of months. Sieges on these cities would not just be a few days long. They would usually last months. They would see if they could starve out the population. They would have different offensives and skirmishes. And eventually there would be a main siege, and you would have different sorts of siege equipment. Siege weaponry would be a huge part of this. Battering, not just rams, ladders and siege towers were extraordinarily common at this time. The catapults were a definite standard, and later on, obviously, the development of the trebuchet will make it easier to basically launch projectiles and destroy the enemy's fortifications. But yeah, the idea, so a lot of people will talk about the Crusades and say the Crusades are either justified or not justified, like some of you have already talked about in the channel. I can't fully speak to that, but if there was ever a Crusade that was justified, it was certainly the first one, because the first Crusade is the main and only successful Crusade. It actually manages to liberate Jerusalem and defeat the Seljuks, knocking them out of control of almost all of Palestine and the Levant, and establishing several different Christian kingdoms in Tripoli. I think there's one in Tripoli, there's one in Antioch, and then the main Crusader states is the Kingdom of Jerusalem. And they're going to be ruled by different French noble families who will take over when they manage to come to the throne. So there's a Kingdom of Jerusalem established, and this is where you get all the Baldwins that we'll talk about in a minute. But the victory over the Muslims is an unexpected one. It is overwhelmingly surprising, and the vast majority the success is pretty good. But there is obviously a mixed bag with this. You are talking about people, women, children, men, all of it. The Crusaders massacre the population of Jerusalem, killing people pretty indiscriminately of whether they're Muslim or not, in an effort to liberate the holy city. Obviously, this also includes the targeting of Jews who think that Jerusalem is just as holy as the Christians and the Muslims do, and the Jews aren't known for having holy wars throughout their history, especially at this point. So Jerusalem is conquered. The Crusader states are established, so there's several different principalities. The Kingdom of Jerusalem, Antioch, I think Antioch and Tripoli are one, and the Kingdom of Odessa is another. And these are going to rule over large sections of Syria, modern-day Lebanon, all the way down into Jordan, of course, the modern states of Israel and Palestine, Gaza, the West Bank, that is all going to be controlled by the Christians. And the Muslims, the Seljuks are kind of beaten and bloodied after this, and they're going to be in retreat. And another Muslim kingdom is going to have to emerge that will eventually throttle them. But constant attacks from different Muslim peoples from the east and from the south are going to basically be the norm for these crusading states for the next 90 years. So for the next 90 years, the Christians will control the city of Jerusalem with a French-related noble family, not the French kingdom, but a French-related noble family with relations to Geoffrey of Boulogne, I believe, controlling the main epicenter of Jerusalem with the Kingdom of Jerusalem, and there will be four kings. There will be four kings who will rule over it, named Baldwin, and of course Baldwin IV will be the famous one who, trying to remember the Ridley Scott movie, who wears the mask, who has leprosy and is actually able to lead his forces in several victories against one of the greatest generals of all time. So there's more going on, to be sure. The Second Crusade is kind of a humiliating onslaught. The Crusaders try to take over more lands for Tripoli and Odessa, and eventually the Antioch and Tripoli kingdoms and Odessa tried to take over more land. This is in the 1130s. The French king goes there. It's a massacre. The Crusaders are defeated soundly and get no more land. The Muslims start to make incursions and eventually are able to take back a lot of these areas, eventually whittling down the Crusader holdings to the Kingdom of Jerusalem itself by the 1170s. The Byzantines and the Catholics have gone in separate ways, and the Catholics are administering most of this. Christians have access to the holy sites now, but the Muslims obviously want their holy city back, and this is going to this is going to bring us to one of the most important historical figures in military generals in history, one of the most important historical figures in all of Islamic history, Saladin, who is a Kurdish general who rises in the ranks of the Egyptian army, and through his ability to be a skillful politician, a man of peace and justice, but also an extremely strong commander and an excellent general. He is able to eviscerate the Christians on many occasions, defeating them soundly. Saladin, and his victories are phenomenal. And what it is that you do next? Nur-ed-Din. Okay, so he rises in the ranks of the Egyptian military. He becomes one of their leading generals, and eventually he has enough power to overthrow, despite the fact that he is not an Egyptian, he is a Kurd. He has the power to overthrow the kingdom that is there and establish his own sultanate, a Muslim kingdom called the kingdom of the Ayyubid dynasty, which takes over and will rule over most of the Middle East, especially the western part of the Middle East and the Levant, for a long time. So Saladin is an impressive general. He's extremely talented. He knows what he's doing, and he knows how to fight the Crusaders like no one else ever has. He wins several major victories against the Christians, but he isn't able to take Jerusalem, mainly because he is thwarted by a young man with leprosy named Baldwin IV. And Baldwin is able to run circles around Saladin. Many of the Muslims are worried about Baldwin's disease and see him as more of a legendary, almost mythical-like scourging figure that's very dangerous. Battle of Hattin. Saladin loses a lot of his battles, interestingly enough, against this crusading king. However, Baldwin has no children. He has nothing that can really replace him, and he's extremely weak and sickly, and he dies at just the age of 23 in 1187. And it's after that Saladin is able to win and go on and take over Jerusalem, conquering the entire city and reestablishing Muslim control now under his own dynasty, the Montesquieu. Yes, now establishing a new Muslim state that will control the holy city of Jerusalem, and that becomes the Ayyubid dynasty, which will last for several centuries. So Baldwin loses the mandate of heaven, if he ever had it before. The Crusader states have been decimated and destroyed. There's still some Christian influence in the area, but basically Saladin has squashed it. And Saladin has enough respect for the Christians to allow them to pilgrimage into the city. He doesn't assault them like the Seljuks did. He has an understanding of just war theory that Christians were supposed to also have. He's seen by almost all accounts, be they Christian or Muslim, as a respectable, honorable man, as well as an excellent tactician and great general. So the Christians, having lost this land that they controlled in Western Europe, are now aching for a fight, and they're aching to take it back. And this leads to the mandate of the Third Crusade. I'm trying to remember who was Pope at the time, but basically it's kind of a more grassroots uprising, and you have various different Christian kings signing on to the crusade, including two of the most important kings in medieval history. Philip II of France, better known as Philippe Augustus, one of the greatest kings in French history, and of course Richard the Lionheart. Now Richard was at this point one of a number of sons of Henry II, who has been fighting with his father forever to try to take over the English throne. Philip is the new king of France, and he is obsessed with retaking land. You also have Frederick Barbarossa, the red-bearded, who is the German emperor, the Holy Roman Emperor, who will kind of try to be involved in the fight, but won't really get that far. The Hungarians join. There's several different other small offshoots that will join this crusade, and so you have some of the big heavy hitters, especially after 1189 when Richard becomes the King of England. Despite that fact, his commitment to fight in the crusade trumps his ability to be the King of England, so he leaves England in the hands of one of his ministers, and along with Philip and others goes eastward. Richard is delayed because he decides to conquer Cyprus and just take it over for a little while, and then later sells it. Believe it or not, yes, Richard the Lionheart conquered all of Cyprus. Philip and him arrive in the Holy Land. They win a few battles. The Crusaders now have a very, very resilient and powerful army, and this looks like bad news for Saladin, but the continual fighting between Richard and Philip will eventually lead to the Third Crusade, probably the most famous crusade, by the way, fizzling out into nothing because many of the Europeans are hogtied in different ways. Philip and Richard's continual bickering will lead Philip to pull his forces out of the attack. Richard will capture one of the most important cities of Acre, reestablishing the foothold of the kingdom of I believe it's Tripoli. I think I'm saying that right. I think it's Tripoli. Reestablishing the kingdom of Tripoli in the north, and eventually we reach an impasse. Saladin cannot defeat Richard. Richard is such a strong and he's a great tactician in his own right. He's such a brave and and well-respected general that the Muslims give him the title of the Lionheart. They didn't call, the Europeans did not give it to him. The Muslims gave it to him. And yes, and Tripoli is modern-day Lebanon, by the way. So Richard and Saladin eventually make a deal. It's one of the first major deals ever struck between a Christian and a Muslim, where it basically allows the safe passage of all of the pilgrims into Jerusalem, something that Saladin was already interested in doing, and establishes the safety of the Christian states that are left over, while also recognizing Islam's right to hold on to Jerusalem, which will continue for 8 centuries. The Muslims will not relinquish Jerusalem until the creation of the State of Israel. Jerusalem will remain under different control of different Muslim entities, such as the Ayyubid dynasty, the Mamelukes, and later, of course, the Ottoman Empire. What happens next? So the third crusade, so we've been through 3 crusades. The first one was successful, the third one was kind of successful, the second one wasn't successful at all. The Crusaders aren't going to be happy with this and are going to want to take Jerusalem. I'm going to mention 2 more crusades, but there's really 8 over major ones and there's small minor ones. There's actually dozens of crusades. It was very common for popes to call crusades. Crusades could eventually the Crusaders are going to go into the habit of more of targeting certain areas rather than targeting just Jerusalem. So the Fourth Crusade is probably the most embarrassing one, and this is where the Christians kind of realize they're in over their heads when it comes to retaking the Holy Land, because they can't be on the same page with each other. If that hadn't been clear with Philip and Richard fighting constantly, it becomes clear when the Christian Crusaders arrive in Byzantium or Constantinople, and they are going to go from there to get to the Middle East, but they say to themselves, hey, the infidels are not in... We don't have to worry about the infidels over there. We're with infidels right now. The Orthodox are not real Christians. They're infidels. We're Catholics. And they ransack and destroy the city. They kick out the Byzantine Empire, and for, I think, a few decades, there is a Latin kingdom that controls, under the influence of the Pope heavily, that controls that isthmus there, that strait, the Dardanelles? Dardanelles. I think it's Dardanelles. Yeah, that controls Constantinople, and the regions surrounding it. And eventually the Byzantines will take it back. But the Fourth Crusade utterly fails. I think it's 1209, because of the Crusaders basically deciding to target Byzantines instead of Muslims, Christians turning on Christians. It becomes a little bit of a religious civil war, and it's a huge, huge loss. Yes, the Battle of Adrianople. There's been so many battles of Adrianople. But yes, the Christians succeed in retaking not succeed in retaking the Holy Land, but succeed in taking over Constantinople for a little while. Eventually the Byzantines will come in and kick them out. The Fifth Crusade, just about 5 years later, the Christians decide, instead of going through the Byzantine Empire, they will go through Egypt. So this leads to the attack against the Ayyubid dynasty. Saladin is dead now. There's another ruler who's come after him, but the Christians, I think they're led by King Louis. Is it King Louis the Ninth? It's I think it's King Louis IX, who is actually captured and ransomed and held there for several years. So the Christians lose another huge battle there. Yes, Al-Kamil in the Fifth Crusade. Yeah, I don't know if the Byzantines quite started it. So the Fifth Crusade ends in failure. The Muslims once again end in success. They are able to, the Christians don't get anywhere closer to Jerusalem. Their idea of conquering Egypt first fails miserably, and another crusade has gone down. Louis is captured and eventually ransomed back to his own people, but it's quite a devastating loss. And from then on, the Crusades more or less are going to become a way for Christians to try not just to reconquer the Muslim Holy Lands, but to conquer areas of Christendom and Europe that they don't believe are Christian enough. Some of the most major crusades of the 13th and 14th centuries that are actually extremely successful are the Crusades in Iberia. The Pope is going to approve a series of different crusades to help the Spanish Catholics fight against the Muslims. And some of these crusades are going to lead to the liberation of Portugal, but also eventually going to help the Spanish, the emerging kingdoms of Castile, Leon, and Aragon push back the Muslim control, the Almoravids, they were called. The Moors, the Almoravids, there's different names for different groups, push back their influence and control over the Iberian Peninsula, liberate Portugal, and eventually in 1492, the last Muslims are going to be kicked out of Spain by Ferdinand and Isabella, who immediately, thanks to the help of the Crusades for all these centuries, are going to use a new instrument called the Inquisition to persecute Jews and Muslims living in their areas as they seek to get rid of all Muslims in their region. But And another reason the Crusades start to get stymied is the invasion of the Mongols. There are Crusades called against them. They don't go anywhere. Eventually, the Mongols will go back. They'll get into Europe a couple of times, but they're not going to make huge incursions except in Russia. The Northern Crusades are in the 14th century. A group of knights called the Teutonic Knights are German knights who are going to be sanctioned by the Pope to try to conquer northeastern Europe, including the Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, modern-day those areas. They're going to try to take over Novgorod, but Alexander Nevsky, one of the most famous figures in Russian history, is able to turn them back, and he's also able to keep the Mongols from taking over his people. Basically, continual assaults against different pagan groups in Northern Europe are going to involve crusades. A new group of heretics called the Catharis, the Waldensians, and the Albigensians in the south of France will bring about a couple more crusades. I think these are in the 14th century, where the Pope will rally Christian forces to destroy fellow European communities that have supposedly drifted into heresies regarding certain Catholic doctrines. So it's used against the Muslims in Spain. It's used against the Byzantines in the Fourth Crusade. It's used against Northern Europeans to help subjugate and Christianize those areas. And of course, it is used in the south of France. So again, there's dozens of crusades. Not a full story of the Crusades would not be complete without talking about the Children's Crusade, which was an excursion in about 1218, led by a man named Peter the Hermit. It was a group of young men, teenagers, teenagers, men. These weren't 5-year-old boys for the most part, but deciding to make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem and recapture the land. None of them ever reached Jerusalem. It was never sanctioned by the church. It got out of hand, fell apart due to lack of funding and interest, but obviously showed how far people had gone in their interest of the Crusades. Speaking of those who took up the cross, several different military units developed that become extremely important to European history for the next few centuries. A French group of knights becomes extremely popular, known as the Knights Templar, and in order to counteract what they see as extreme usury and interest charged by Jewish moneylenders, they develop their own banking system that is supposed to charge little to no interest to fellow Christian crusaders. The Knights Hospitaller become one of the Defensores Fides, defenders of the faith, that become quite popular in Italy. In 1565, a small amount of them are able to defeat a huge Ottoman force, a Muslim force at Malta. And the Teutonic Knights, who I already mentioned, are going to try their absolute darndest to turn back and conquer as much of the Baltic area as possible, as well as make incursions into Russia, trying to spread the Catholic faith into Eastern Europe as they can. Obviously, Poland and Hungary and several Eastern European states are already Catholic, but this is an attempt to turn Northeastern Europe, including Russia, into Catholic kingdoms. It's met with very, very mixed results. So I think I've gone over the vast majority of the Crusades of the time. I've talked about their basic, what they're able to accomplish, what they're not able to accomplish. After the Fourth Crusades, the Crusades become something that is more sporadic and far more European invested than it is invested in the Middle East. It becomes obvious that the Crusaders have not achieved many of their goals, and they're not just going to keep banging their heads against the wall. Some of the resources, learning, and materials they bring back from the Middle East help spark interest in science, mathematics, and study of human philosophy. This will lead to the development of the Renaissance. But basically, the Crusades are met with very, very thumbs down results. The Christians spend centuries, lots of money, lots of lives, and don't really get far in their incursions. But it becomes a part of the historical zeitgeist. It's one of the most famous parts of history. It's often seen as either extremely good or extremely bad. It's like many things in history, it has a lot of mixed results, especially something with such mixed results and in such a mixed legacy. There are plenty of interesting and fascinating things about it, but there are plenty of extreme low points. Ransacking and killing people ad nauseum is a huge part of the Crusader itinerary. Massacres against Muslims, Jews, and even other Christians are quite common. And destruction of heretics in the south of France and in Spain will eventually inspire the rise of the Inquisition, as the Catholic Church doesn't use armies, but uses just as militant and violent ways to try to suppress dissent and heresy. But basically, by the middle of the 13th century, the Crusades, the idea of recapturing Jerusalem seems so far out of the idea, and Richard's agreement with Saladin had allowed the Muslims to basically assert their claim to Jerusalem. By the middle of the 13th century, the Muslims have broken their part of the agreement, and the Crusader states, including the city of Antioch, which Richard captured, will fall back into the Muslim hands, and the Crusaders there will be destroyed, and that area will be firmly under Muslim domination, and in many ways still to this day. So this is, many people compare crusades and jihads. A lot of people can see parallels between the two. They're not always quite the same. Crusades are still used in, just as jihads have been defanged in some ways for some Muslims, crusades have been defanged in some ways for some Christians. People use crusades to refer to winning, to evangelistic efforts towards other people. Obviously, many people do not see that as politically correct, but crusades were a huge part of evangelists throughout American history, trying to win over people to the Christian message. So just as for many Muslims, jihad is a way of the struggle of sin rather than a holy war. Although it has been used as holy war, Christians will sometimes use crusades as a way to win souls for Christ rather than kill souls on the battlefield. But that's a basic layout of the Crusades. The French were the most heavily involved in it. The Holy Roman Empire also had a part to play in it. The English, obviously, with Richard the Lionheart, had their biggest say during the Third Crusade. But it's a fascinating way. This also helps lead to the liberation of Spain and Portugal from the Muslims. And obviously, Spain and Portugal would create the first major settlements in the New World. The development of the West is made in North and South America is because Spain is able to throw off the Muslims, and then to celebrate, send off Columbus on a voyage to try to get to India. And he, of course, will think he's in India, but it's really the Caribbean. So there's a basic a basic rundown of the Crusades, the Western Europe's attempts to retake the Holy Land after the Muslims had controlled it for 4 centuries, but it ended up with the Muslims still controlling the Holy Land. The Western Europe, you could say in some ways the desire for many Western Europeans, not just the Spanish and Portuguese, to go to the New World is because of the failure of the Crusades, driving a deeper wedge between Christians and Muslims. Muslims to this day can still look at the Crusades as an absolute travesty of Christian imperialism, in which the Christians try to take over their lands and persecute them for their religion. Christians see the Crusades as a failed attempt to retake the Holy Land for Christ, and as perhaps a stain on their legacy. Again, this is just a religious lens in which these different groups look at it. Obviously, the Jews do not look at the Crusades in a very positive light, given the fact that they were often the second biggest target for Christian fighters other than the Muslims themselves. And so that's a basic rundown of the Crusades. That's the reasons for it. Those are the different Crusades. That's its legacy, its impact, why it's still popular, why you still hear about it, why a lot of people want to bring back the Crusades, or why a lot of people want to defend the Crusades, or why a lot of people want to castigate Christians because of the Crusades. It's a continual it has a continual cultural and political impact. It's part of the historical zeitgeist, like I mentioned before, and is something that every historian worth his salt needs to address and find a particular historiography. And like I said, there's obviously some truth to all of these different perspectives on it. It's very easy in a rudimentary way to look at the Crusades and see them as failures and absolute violations of Christian law and decency, something that Jesus himself never would have practiced. But understanding the historical context around it, and especially understanding some of the violence within the Bible, you come to understand that there's actually a little more nuance to it there. So, yep. I think we're there. Kingdom of Heaven, that's the name of the movie. I'd forgotten about the movie named Kingdom of Heaven. I think that does it for the live stream lecture. We went about 45 minutes talking about the Crusades, a topic I've discussed here before on the channel, but I gave you a little bit more detail and a little bit more stuff. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you enjoyed this, I hope you did. I've got about 15 minutes to answer your questions about history and social studies. Carl, I really appreciate the donations. Felix, great questions earlier. I really, really appreciate all the help you can give. So if you want to give a super chat, I would really love it, but no pressure. And again, if you like this, please subscribe. But if you have questions about history or social studies, drop them in the chat, and I'm happy to answer them. Oh, by the way, I wanted to share this image. Oops, turn off my camera and did it again. Sorry. I wanted to share this image of. I didn't share it. This is Constantinople, Nova Roma, which is later, of course, develops under emperors like Constantine and Justinian, and then, of course, is captured by the Crusaders in the Fourth Crusade. What's your personal opinion on Crusades? I think that the Crusades were only justified in that they were successful. If they actually managed to accomplish what they did, then I can understand why they were done. That means that the successful crusade was the First Crusade. The Byzantines had earlier ransacked their Latin quarter and left bitter feelings. There's a lot of back and forth finger pointing between the Byzantines and the Christians in the West, and by the time you get to the 13th century, it doesn't happen overnight. The divide had become so pronounced that you get the ransacking of Constantinople by the Christians, by the Western Christians. Jews supported the Muslim invasion of Spain. I don't know if that's true. Many Jews preferred to live in medieval Muslim areas than they did to live in Christian areas, and that has kind of flipped on its head because a lot of Jews now prefer to live in Christian areas than in Muslim areas, probably because of the rise of radical Islam in the last century and a half. Yeah, what was, gotta ask, what were the objectives? To gain land? The main objectives was to take back the land that belonged to, to take back the holy city and the land that Christ walked on and make it a Christian area again because it had already been conquered, and to give the Byzantines back land that they had lost in Turkey to the Seljuk Turks. That was at least in the First Crusade. But the basic idea is to take land that was formerly Christian and give it back to the Christians. They believed this was pleasing to the Lord and that the Lord would look kindly on them for that. Let me see here. He's constantly throwing Islamic conquests around to attack Christians. He's actually just mentioning different battles that were fought during the Crusades, and I appreciate him doing that. Yeah, I've heard about Roy Casagranda's. I haven't watched them yet. He really doesn't like the Crusades. I know that. Let me see here, looking for the chat. Your people are refugees in Europe and not warriors anymore. I don't know what you're talking about. Which was the movie you said earlier? I think it's called Kingdom of Heaven. It's Ridley Scott. Orlando Bloom is in it. And it's about Saladin and Baldwin IV. Yeah, Kingdom of Heaven. Victoria, hello. So if you guys have any, I'm sorry I haven't been interacting with the chat, but I've obviously been doing my lecture. I do these every Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern. I've got videos on the Crusades you guys can go watch. And of course I have long-form videos dropping Monday and Friday, shorts every day. And I have my Q&As Fridays and Saturdays at 6 p.m. Eastern. If you want to get all your history questions answered by a historian, I'd be happy to help you with that. And for the next 10, 15 minutes, I'll be answering all your questions again about history and social studies. So, yeah, obviously Ridley Scott is not known for being an accurate historical depictor, but neither is Mel Gibson, and Braveheart's still a great movie. Is Russia conducting a crusade? No, I don't see the Russia invasion of Ukraine as anything other than nationalistic rhetoric and efforts to rebuild the Russian Empire or Soviet Union and to see how far along you can get with that, because you know you can't get all the way because you're not as strong as you think you are. My opinion about that has been the same from the beginning. Basically, I think Russia's kind of a paper tiger trying to flex muscles it doesn't have over weaker Eastern European states. And by the way, I'm going to write a Substack on this. You guys can read my articles on Substack. But basically, if Zelensky wears a suit tomorrow, war is going to end. If Zelensky wears military fatigues tomorrow, war is going to go on. That will be how you know what's going to happen. What do you think of Oliver Cromwell, as I call him, King Oliver I? I'm of a similar mindset. I think he definitely superseded Parliament. He got tired of the bickering that he had complained Charles I had problems with at first, and eventually just tried to style himself a king. The fact that he had his own son take over after him is definitely monarchical, and Parliament was like, this is kind of pointless, so let's just bring back the Stuarts. I didn't cite Kingdom of Heaven as a source. I do not think Kingdom of Heaven I do not cite it. I mentioned it as a movie you can go watch. I never said that it's something I believe. Russia has currently barred all services of Ukrainian and Latin services in Donetsk and Lyshansk. Yes, while constantly trying to push propaganda, but the Ukrainians have done the same things. And the Ukrainians have cracked down on the religion, on Russian Orthodoxy, because the Russian Orthodox Church is a nationalist church that is promoting Russian talking points in Ukraine. And yes, there are many Russians in Ukraine who have fled from Russia or who just happen to live there. You can't tell the story about Ukraine without Russia. And in many ways, because of the Kievan Rus starting in Kyiv, you can't tell the story about Russia without Ukraine itself. I don't think Trump is another Chamberlain. I think that I don't see Hitler as, Putin is another Hitler. I don't think that the appeasement thing, it might be appeasement, but I think it's appeasement with some teeth. If you get the Article 5 stuff going, if you get the militarization of the Ukraine, I don't see it that way. I don't think that this is a promise without stuff. I think that I don't see Putin as strong as Hitler. I don't see the Russian army quite being the Wehrmacht. If it had been the Wehrmacht, this war would have ended already, and Ukraine would have all been conquered. The Russian army is not blitzkrieging through Ukraine. It certainly can't. It's just not strong enough. Their leader isn't strong enough. And I think military backup of basically creating what Ursula von der Leyen, the leader of the EU, calls the porcupine, the steel porcupine, is a lot better than what the British did to the Czechoslovakians. Putin's smart, but he also knows that he wants a victory. If he can go back to his people and say, I won, then, and he gets Donetsk, then he can say he won. Zelensky needs to go back to his people and say, I fought for you. Because Zelensky is going to stand up for an election that he hasn't stood for because the Ukrainian constitution doesn't allow elections during a war, and he has to stay in power too. Both of these men, I think, are obsessed with staying in power. I think almost everyone in power is like that. A lecture on Teddy Roosevelt? Yeah, that'd be a good one. Trump definitely appeases dictators. There is no debate about that. Somewhat, not all the time. I mean, the idea that you can never ever appease a dictator is just an overblown exaggeration based on what happened with Chamberlain. Now, is appeasing, Putin break his promises? Yes. Should people trust Putin's promises? Probably not. Is a highly militarized NATO-backed Ukraine something Putin would trespass against again? I seem to doubt it. Yeah, there's so many differences, in my opinion. Wasn't Ukraine a part of Russian Empire and then the Soviet Union? Yes. Ukraine didn't become its own independent country until 1991. And in 1954, because the new leader of the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev, was a Ukrainian, he gave Crimea back to the Ukraine. The Ukraine had never controlled Crimea before then. I'm not saying that they should control it now. I'm just spouting the history. I've seen Tucker. I need to still watch it in full, but I've seen the parts of Tucker's interview with Putin. Putin loves to manipulate and lie about history in order to get his narrative across. I'm not just doing Russian talking points. I'm not doing Ukrainian talking points. I'm doing history talking points. I hope EU turns back on Trump. I don't think so. Other than Macron, almost every single European leader is kind of on board with him. Yes, there is a war going on. That's why he delayed the elections. I don't see Zelensky as a dictator. I see him as an oligarch. There's a difference. I definitely think when you're talking about which is worse, you can easily make the case that Putin is more immoral, more of a dictator, more of a despot than Zelensky is. And I think that people who just want to point out all of Zelensky's flaws and not talk about Putin's flaws are just being disingenuous. And that's how you actually use that word, Harsonet. Britain is a democracy and we didn't have any elections for 9 years because we were in a war. Does that make us undemocratic? No. I mean, Putin got the push to invade Ukraine when they started talks to join the EU. Yeah, there's a lot of frustration by the Russians for if Ukraine joins NATO or the EU, you have a NATO ally, which NATO was created to undermine the Russians on Russia's border. That triggers a lot of Russians because Russians are constantly fearing invasion. Whatever you think of Putin and the Russians, and I'm sure most of us are against the war and against Russia doing the war and all of that stuff and don't want Russia to overwhelmingly succeed. You've got to understand the context as to why they are doing this. I hope the EU gives Donald Trump as good as he gives. The EU is just doing what he wants, so that's not happening, Harry. I mean, Schramer certainly seems to be okay with what Trump is doing. Schramer's going to be at the White House tomorrow. So we want America to succeed, right? Why are Democrats wanting us to fail? I don't care about the political rhetoric. What is democracy if the people are stupid? That's a good point. Democracy, I mean, a democracy only works for a moral and just people, was what the founders believed. But I don't think Zelensky is a despot. I mean, he locked up people opposing the war while they're fighting a war for their country's survival. Abraham Lincoln did it, Churchill did it. I see him as, I never said he was a dictator. I think he's obviously amassed a lot of power for himself. There's obviously a lot of questions about corruption within his government and his administration. There are questions about why he hasn't moved to end the war sooner. There's a lot of questions about why there's so many casualties for the Ukrainians, why the continual fighting. There are a lot of questions about Zelensky that I think are fair to ask. And just because you dislike Putin doesn't mean you don't get to ask those questions about Zelensky. Henry, that might be oversimplified. I don't think that the Ukrainians should give up huge amounts of their land either. I mean, I can understand why any country wouldn't want to do that. Corrupt politicians are getting massive kickbacks from all billions of billions sent to Ukraine. That's a common argument. So that obvious, I don't know how much teeth is in that argument, but that's something that's thrown out all the time. Russia might win because they have started their economic development towards a war economy. Yeah. I just think I just feel that if Ukraine had Putin has agreed to basically give NATO and the US the ability to strengthen Ukraine's position to where if he invaded it, he'd basically cause a world war. I just don't see Putin, if he's going to allow them to do that, I don't see him breaking his word to go back in there, because that means absolute obliteration for him. It's not just a war, it's an obliteration if he goes back. Because Putin has completely ridiculous terms for ending the war. He's never going to agree to a Paris deal where he can't join the EU and NATO and doesn't get security agreements from America. Yeah, he actually has said that he's agreed to it, Henry. He doesn't want him to join the EU or NATO, but he does. But he will allow them to arm them and create he will allow military securities guaranteed by the EU and the United States. He just said that. He just wants Donetsk because of oil, probably, in the Donbass region, and he doesn't want them joining the EU and NATO. First-time listener, since day of the war, I said that Putin's ego would not accept any outcome against the land grab. I still believe that to you. Probably, yeah. What U.S. presidents? I mean, it will be interesting to see what happens. What U.S. presidents would you like to live under the effect of their policies? Lincoln. I like the Homestead Act. I like that roaring economy of the 1920s. Harry Truman. Eisenhower obviously did a lot of good. Those are a few. Can Europe survive without Russian oil and gas? Yes, it could. I mean, people who, no, I mean, this things you can criticize Zelensky for, but he was elected and he isn't a dictator and he isn't a despot. Yes, I'm saying that, I'm not saying that, I'm saying I don't see Zelensky as this pure model just because Putin is evil, or people think Putin is evil. And I've heard a lot of people defend, I've heard all the talking points to defend Putin. I've heard all the talking points to ridicule him. I've heard all of it. Can Europe survive? I already answered that. I think people who say Russia is weak don't know that Ukraine is being trained by UK and US trainers after Crimea got annexed. That's true too. After the Minsk agreements, the US, the UK, France, they're doing everything they can to get Ukraine as a bulwark. So why would Zelensky agree to anything about it? Will you let you arm your country, but you can't join any other country to improve your defense? No, that's not true, Harry. You're not listening to me. I said Putin has already said that he will accept them giving military securities and backup to the Ukrainians. He just won't let them, he just doesn't want them to join NATO because NATO was created to be against the Russians. I don't know any Russian who would want that. I understand that, at least partially. I can understand Zelensky also not wanting to give up land. I think the incentive for Zelensky to end the war is to stop the killing because the Ukrainians are at the disadvantage. They are not winning this war right now. You can't work with any other country on your defense. You can't get the protection of Article 5 in the economic might of the European Union. That's not true, Harry. That is not what is happening. I'm sorry, but Putin has already said he's willing to guarantee security, European, EU, NATO securities, which they have said are Article 5-esque, to back up and defend the Ukrainians against Putin. That's actually what's happening. Do you think Baby Bush was a good president? I think a lot of the instability in the Middle East is because of the Bush presidency. Why did baby boom of the 1950s phenomenon even happen? Why did it end? People who had been poor and downtrodden were now prosperous. Their country was prosperous. It was easy for them to survive. They came back from war and decided to start basically building lives for themselves. The government was encouraging this, was incentivizing people to have families and children. They were making it easier for people to have families and children because they believed that having a larger, it would help the economy, it would help the culture, it would strengthen them against the Soviet Union. It was a lot of Cold War narratives that went into it. Yes, Putin is just evil. This is exactly what Putin wants. He doesn't want Ukrainian. He doesn't want in the European Union. He doesn't want it to have a country with any significant military might to be able to defend itself, except that he's agreed to allow it to have military might to defend itself. Harry, you're just not listening to me. But the thing is, no peace is coming soon because Russia has the initiative on the battlefield, so it won't push as strong for a peace, and Ukraine can't ask for much without bargaining power. Right, which is why Trump's solution is territorial concessions, and we'll see how far that gets. Again, if Zelensky's wearing a suit, I know this sounds trivial and stupid, and it sounds like something silly, but if Zelensky is wearing a suit, they're gonna end the war. If he's not wearing a suit, the war's gonna go on. That will represent that the European delegation is going to do things the Trumpian way, or are they going to go on their own? And I fully expect the United States to just pull out completely from anything if Trump doesn't get what he wants, because that's what he always does when he doesn't get what he wants. Putin doesn't want Ukraine to join NATO and have weapons pointed at Moscow, just like how the U.S. didn't want Russia to have bases in Cuba, and we stopped it instantly. That's not a fair comparison because there were never any signed agreements for that. It was a verbal agreement. Harry has pointed that out to me on multiple occasions. The truth of the matter is, biscuits, I understand why you can understand why any country wouldn't want to have a neighbor who is in that position, but I don't think that NATO would just set up the Ukraine to have weapons pointed at them. NATO has moved on. Putin needs to stop with the 1980s geopolitical structure. Would you be interested in doing a special 2, 3, 4 hour plus live stream marathon, maybe on a holiday or something? Oh, you mean go Hassan Piker on all y'all? That'd be fun. I would just need donations for coffee, but yeah. Can race determine superiority? No. Gendered colonialist language needs to end. I agree with that. Here's a moderated vision. You give me whatever I want now, and then Europe and America can defend whatever is left. That's not what he said. It's not whatever he wants. It's really just only Donetsk. I'm not trying to defend or apologize for Putin. I'm trying to say what is actually happening. This is why I do a news update every day, because I don't trust the narratives I hear. And I'm sorry, it just seems like certain people just hear the narratives, read the headlines, don't read the full article, don't look at what actually has happened, don't actually listen to what the public speakers are saying, and then come up with their opinions based off of that. Yes, people really dislike Putin in the West, and there are many, many reasons for that, and many of them I'm sure are good. But my point is that you have to understand where these people are coming from. As much as we understand where the Ukrainians are coming from as Westerners, most Westerners need to understand where the Russians are coming from. And Harry, your own prime minister doesn't agree with you. I'm sure you didn't care much for the peace talk. You felt that Trump just laid down to Putin. That's not what Stramer thinks. That's not what the British government, that's not what von der Leyen, that's not what Rutte, that's not what Erdogan, none of them think that. Most people realize that that was a step towards peace. It's not a huge step like they wanted, but it's an interesting step. Putin is just like Pol Pot. That's true. Putin is savage. He's brutal. The Russians try to come up with this Potemkin village of this nice area of where they live in. They like to think that they are the religious bulwark for Christianity, fighting against the liberalizing, secularizing West. And it's all a bunch of lies. By every metric, church attendance is worse in Russia than it is in Western Europe and the United States. Abortion rates are higher in Russia than they are in the United States and the West. Russia is not based. I'm sorry to have broken your narrative on that, but Russia is not based. So it's not just about it, but it's the terrain. Otter, good to see you. If we see the map, then there is a plan going from Germany, you can say, all the way deep into Russia. I've heard about that. I think the Treaty of Versailles caused World War II, or what I consider to be World War III. No, I think that's an oversimplification of history, and I think when you believe that, and you believe that's one of the main causes, you are believing Nazi propaganda. That's what the Nazis wanted you to believe. I'm serious about that war, that the French and the British, because they treated the Germans so bad, that's why we have to take back the land. That was untrue in 1935, and it's untrue in 2025. Although the Treaty of Versailles did not help things like people thought it was, the United States stepping in with the Dawes Act, things like that, by the late 1920s, war against Europe was not something on Germany's radar by any stretch of imagination. Baba, race doesn't determine IQ. Cultural factors, external factors, the ability to read, the access to information at an early age, that is much more determinative of IQ. If Canada invades America and just gives me 2 of your states and I'll leave, what would America do? If 2 million Americans had died, maybe they would stop. Harry, your view, yeah. Okay, let's not all crowd on Harry. I understand where he's coming from. If Mexico attacked the United States and wanted to take California back, a lot of Americans would say, no, we're going to fight till we hold on to California. If America was outmatched without foreign aid, and the major foreign aid player was Germany, and Germany was saying war needs to stop now, then America might have to give half of California. What are your thoughts on what, mayonnaise? NATO has just expanded way past to what it was agreed, so I understand there is a lot of Russian propaganda in the West, as well as Muslim. Yes, there are a lot of people paid to be influencers, and I'm not one of them, to defend Israel, the Palestinians, or the Russians, or maybe even the Ukrainians. The military-industrial complex loves this. I'm not one of them. I'm being paid to talk about history. Our prime minister is a Donald Trump suck-up. Yes, a labor prime minister being a Donald Trump suck-up. See, that's just ad hominem. Who really started the Reichstag fire? I am tempted to believe that it was a inside job done by, I don't know, by the Nazis. I don't know if it was a Dutch communist, and even if it was, seriously, the enabling acts. I am not Arab. The agreement that NATO would not expand 1 inch east was a totally verbal agreement made by the Secretary of State in America without consulting the U.S. President about that wild statement. Yes, and the Russians are going to hold you to it. I'm sorry, Harry, but I'm not even talking about that agreement. The idea that the Russians see NATO as being created to destroy Russia, and that's what they were originally. And the fact that Russia or destroyed the Soviet Union stopped them, so Ukraine being part of NATO does make a lot of sense. This is why a lot of people in America have questions about why NATO even exists. Soon Europe will unite as one empire and won't need two popes. So which pope they choose? Pope Leo XIII at the Vatican or Pope Peter v. Roman 112? Oh, that offshoot pope thing I've heard about, not going anywhere. Sudan or South Sudan? For what? For the war? That's another war people never talk about. There are so many wars going on, people do not talk about it. In Africa, it's just constant. The JNIM, Al-Shabaab, the different ISIS-backed areas in the west and in the east, the RSF in South Ethiopia. Crazy. Why do you consider World War II World War III? Because the French-Indian or 7 Years' War is World War I, the Great War is World War II, the Nazis World War III. Yes, the Syrian genocide, the Armenian genocide, the Christian genocide happened. And who was that who was asking about the Serbian genocide? I did look into it. 8,000 Serbian Muslim men killed, slaughtered by a general in Bosnia by a Serbian, by the Bosnian Christians in 1994. Srebrenica, I think is how you say it, and tens of thousands evacuated. I don't know if you're here, but if you watch this, then you know I did look into it. Do you think Nick Fuentes is paid by someone to push his views? I would rather not think about Nick Fuentes. Can we have an honest conversation about the so-called Jews' contribution on war? Yes, I love this. Let's have an honest every time somebody starts that, let's have an honest conversation about the Jews. It always leads to anti-Semitism on demand. But I'm a free speech absolutist, so of course we can have any honest conversation we want about any topic, Chris W. I don't know what you're thinking of, but please enlighten us. You're telling me Keir Streamer isn't a Donald Trump suck-up? Come on, he delivered a personal letter from the king during a big press conference. Yes, Harry, yes. Keir Streamer is working with Donald Trump. Yes, the Labor Prime Minister of Great Britain. Crazy. It's almost like Great Britain and Mark Rutte of NATO and von der Leyen and everybody but Macron, even Zelensky, seems to realize, the Americans are kind of important. Maybe we should, be nice to the American president. And he's kind of irritable, so if we're not nice to him, we're going to get some real problems. What do you think needs to happen for Canada's problems to be diminished? Canada's going through I don't know exactly. They're having population issues, they're having economic issues, cost of living's getting harder. Some sort of agreement with the United States. I don't know about, I think the 51st state thing is nonsense, but yeah, something that helps them out that gets the neighbors to the south who are growing to help the neighbors to the north who are not growing. Can you explain Operation Timber? Okay, Hassan, do not be, yeah, that's true. Yeah, so is Faraj, you're right. Can you explain Operation Timber Sycamore? Doesn't prove USA is creating these terrorist groups? I would have to look into what that is. I haven't heard about that, but the US created the Mujahideen to fight against the Soviets, and that's Osama bin Laden. So yes, just a dude. That has happened many times. Thank you for joining us from South Africa, John Ray. Thank you for joining us. Good to see you. Because Europe is full of people who are terrified for Donald Trump, like the Republican Party in America, it's ridiculous. Terrified? Okay, if you say so. What do you think terrain has to play in the war with Ukraine and Russia and all the tension between NATO and Russia, the Great Plains? That's the issue that makes a counteroffensive out the window. Is the Ural Mountains? A counteroffensive could have been possible without the Ural Mountains. Peter, the Roman name of Marcus Joseph. I've heard of this guy. Yeah, I don't think it means much. Stupid thing is Donald Trump chickens out on any confrontation or pushback to what he wants. So why are they so terrified of him is beyond me. Maybe because you're wrong? Could be that you're wrong. I think he does chicken out on certain things. We can see that just with our plain eyes, but I don't think he chickens out on everything. The taco thing is kind of more like occasionally chickens out. Oko. Muslims slaughter Christian civilians in Bosnia. That's why they did not genocide. They started the war. Yes, I know why the war was started, but they literally just gathered these people together and massacred them. This wasn't even an airstrike or a military operation. It was just to kill Muslims, and that's why it's considered a genocide, Nick. Who put the Bob in Al-Shabaab? I might be pronouncing it. Yes. No offense to anyone who wants to have an honest conversation. I'm willing to talk about anything honestly and to tolerate all sorts of different views, be they whatever. But I just always find there's these buzzwords about let's have an honest conversation, and it's almost always anti-Semitic. Noah appeased the American, one of the dictator that we were all terrified. Okay. Ukraine got that big bro complex that they clearly don't have. Yeah, Russia has the big bro complex too, and it's kind of like the big bro who's kind of past his peak. How did Grant defeat Robert E. Lee in the Appomattox campaign in Virginia? Basically by doing whatever generals didn't do, basically showing no tolerance or patience for the Confederates. Grant just continued to pommel them. That was how Lincoln won re-election, was just like, we're going to pommel them. It was this, instead of just waiting for them to regather like McClellan had did on several occasions, it was chase them, keep chasing them, keep putting the pressure on, don't let them regroup, don't let them find any field position that is advantageous to them. And you got to give Lee credit, he lasted a while. Grant was a particularly strong general. Why did Albanians kill during World War I in the Balkan Wars? Why were they killed? Albania was targeted, Mussolini targeted the Albanians during the Third World War, during the Second World War, what you call World War II. I believe that was Austria-Hungary fighting the Serbians. That was part of it. He chickened out against Putin. He chickened out all of his tariffs. He is totally incompetent on any form of foreign policy. I get it, Harry. You don't like Donald Trump. I think everyone in this chat realizes that whatever their feelings are on Donald Trump, I have this thing called nuance, so I don't agree with that, at least not fully, but yeah. So funny people say Trump chickens out on thing when there isn't one thing he's chickened out on. Oh boy, Otter, don't go the other way on this one. Okay, I'm just going to leave you guys to argue about politics. I already talked about geopolitics enough, and I would rather not spend my live streams talking about Donald Trump incessantly. It's funny. There are two types of people who are obsessed with Trump. His fans, the rabid MAGA people, and rabid leftists. Everybody else is like whatever, like, hate, whatever. He's fine, I guess, or he's bad, or whatever. But there's people on the right who love him are just as obsessed with him on people on the left who hate him. That's why it's called Trump derangement syndrome, and that's why people on the left call it a cult. And when you look at his fans, who will defend literally everything he does, other people will literally criticize every single thing he does. Oh my God, he shook Putin's hand. How dare he not kill him right then and there and cause a world war? I mean, the derangement people have to think this in the midst of a negotiation is just appalling. And Harry, stop making me defend him all the time. Okay, rant over. Read about the 1978 Holy See split of Vatican versus Palmarian. Malachi I saw a vision. Yes, is that Saint Malachi? I've heard about some of this stuff before. I know what it is. I don't think there's much to it, Starboy. No offense. If you're of that persuasion, no offense. It doesn't have the teeth to actually lead to a huge split within the Catholic Church. Let me see. Pincer attack? What pincer attack? America's a third world country. That's all you need to know. Balkanization is inevitable? I certainly hope not. Armando, hello. Why are African Americans today 75% Christians historically? African Americans brought up in the culture mainly of the South were accumulated into certain different Christian traditions. Baptist, Pentecostal traditions are very popular amongst African Americans, but also African Methodist Episcopate became a popular black church. Basically, acculturation in the American South brought with it an acculturation to Methodism and Baptist, where those denominations flourished. I look for it, and I will ask you about it later. An operation to train Syrian opposition members. Trump met with their leaders and ended the sanctions, even though they are committing genocide now. Yeah, is that El-Sharaa, the current president? It's a mess. The Syrian rebels that were being armed have been pretty militant. Syria has been a mess when it comes to leadership, unfortunately. What if the Ottomans won the Great Turkish War? The Ottomans were buying time for themselves with all the wars they won with all the wars they fought against the Russians, but the Russians just continued to just pommel them in the 19th century. Who do you think is the most terrifying serial killer of all time? Serial killer, not a mass murderer. Oh, that's a good one. Terrifying, prolific, they all come to my mind. I think H.H. Holmes kind of gives the first real modern American serial killer and kind of sets the boundaries for what comes next, and literally just setting up a fake hotel just so you can kill people at the World's Fair, Chicago. Terrifying stuff. Do you really think that the middle doesn't care about Trump? He does do the politics for the whole country. Oh, it's that they don't care. It's that they don't have such virulent hatred or crazy fanaticism for him. It's the hatred, the left seems to be absolutely obsessed with him as much as the right is what I'm pointing out. And that's the extremes. And if squeaky wheel gets the grease, it's not the people in the middle. Let me see here. Halcyon stopped gloating over Harry. In the movie The Kingdom of God, did King Baldwin have leprosy? Yes, that's why he wears that mask. But it's in history, too. He was a leper. I don't know about the mask, but I do believe he had special armor. Read about the New York City smog disaster of 1966 that caused the Clean Air Act by LBJ to be passed to decrease smog. Same reason Nixon created the EPA. What about that Israel computer guy in Las Vegas? Just let that go? I don't know. Is that the guy of Mandalay Bay who killed 50 people? I don't know a huge amount about what actually about. I've heard that there are people who want accountability. I don't know what that looks like in that situation. I'm just not an expert, so I can't speak to it. Why should non-citizens be counted for electoral districting? The Republicans certainly don't seem to think so. The census, according to the way the Constitution is written, says all persons living there, meaning that all people who live in the country should be counted for electoral districting, for congressional districting, even if they can't vote. Children are counted, they cannot vote. Households are counted. Not everyone in the household can vote. Felons are counted, they cannot vote. So I just, yeah, it's the argument is that it should only be legal residents or even only American citizens should be allowed to vote. And it's just, there's a lot of politics underneath it, Henry. The Republicans want to weaken Democratic states by getting rid of representatives and districts by not counting illegal aliens, many of whom live in Democratic states. But Democrats want to be able to count them and give them amnesty so that they can have more districts and then more voters, because any group that gets amnesty will vote for the party that gave them amnesty. Who are the Wahhabis and where are they from? And why do they need, please. The Wahhabis are a group of radical Muslims, Bobby. That Russian butcher, oh yeah. There's several different Russian, there's Andrei Chikatilo. There's some crazy Russian butchers. In the movie Alexander O.D., director Oliver Stone did. Alexander Magam was gay. Alexander the Great was gay, or at least bisexual. What do you think of Singapore and its free but extremely unfair democracy? It's economically extremely prosperous, so it seems to be working for them in that regard. I don't know much beyond that. How are Pacific ports in LA and San Francisco used in World War II for the U.S. Navy, especially after Pearl Harbor? Resources, I'm not sure exactly. Deployment, I think there were obviously docks that were used to rebuild ships and things like that, but not a huge amount. But I know, but that's the best I can tell you, Hars. Are Inuits and Aztecs Mayas Native Americans before the Europeans came to America? Yes, they all are, but they are of different groups and tribes and nations, they would even be called. Dems have painted themselves into a corner with their gerrymandering. They have no more room to gerrymander. Not according to California. I mean, doesn't the Constitution say it should be distributed via the number of people in each state, not the number of citizens? Yes, it does. And that's why there's going to be, it's basically the efforts, what Trump is doing is trying to push it to the courts. The new census will go to the courts because if they're going to try to, they can do a census whenever they want, but only once a decade for redistricting. If they try to do a census for redistricting, that's going to get litigated and go to the Supreme Court, and they're going to rule on whether citizens and residents can be counted and not undocumented people. So there's that too. Lawrence Wong, yeah, I heard about that. Huge victory. I don't think that Dems are necessarily going to be getting beat at their own game. It's interesting. We talked about the Crusades. We talked about religion, and it's been politics all during the Q&A. Excuse me. That sneeze took forever. Ottomans are bad, and they were anti-science. Somewhat, but you still have to understand, they had some of the biggest cities, some of the most wealthy cities. I mean, Constantinople was flourishing during their time just as much as they had during the Byzantine time. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that, Doctor Who, where? Jeremy Corbyn, next UK Prime Minister. Is he, which one's he? I think it's probably going to be that reform guy. And I like saying that, not because I'm a big fan of the reform, but because I know Harry's not going to love it. Thank you. Sorry for sneezing on air. Are Inuits genetically more closer to the Siberians than they are to Aztecs? They might be. I'm not sure. No, he doesn't. He's allowed to have his opinion. Thoughts on Jews? They're a people group. What do you want? What opinion do you want me to give, Shaker? If anyone's going to be the next prime minister, if anyone's going to be the next prime minister, the next election is Stramer or Farage. It's not going to be Stramer. Public education is really just childcare so parents can be wage slaves. Dang, that's deep. That's the way. That's all the way from the Black Death period. Yes, I've heard that. St. Paul was a Greek Jew. He was a Roman citizen who was a Jew. He was a Jewish rabbi, I think. Oh, he made his own party? Interesting. Kind of like Nigel Farage, a little bit. Yeah, and I've heard that there's a petition to get him back on the ballot. So, yeah. Tell something about Native Americans in America before European arrival. Um, so the Aztecs and Mayans build advanced civilizations. They build cities. The Incas build cities in the mountains so that they can be closer to the gods. This is in South America. Most Plains Native Americans in Central America and Canada were tended to be more itinerant, where ones in the Southwest and Northeast tended to be more settled, like the Iroquois in New York and the Pueblo in modern-day New Mexico. So there's a few things. True. Speaking of political opinions, Cicero. Cicero had a lot of political opinions. Cicero is one of the reasons we love the Roman Republic and hate Roman monarchies, because he wrote a lot of the history and influenced a lot of the history around the defamation of the 7 Roman tyrants. Check out my video on that for more. People are weird. Why they voted Kier Streamer if they don't like him? They liked him at first. He has dipped in popularity heavily. But yeah, Toltecs, that's another ancient people. The Olmecs, they love to use jade, and they created the big stone heads. No, Bill. I mean, to be fair, you're the one using it in all caps, Rage, so you might be the one on meth. A little bit of projection. But the Indians didn't have the wheel or 2-story buildings. I would count a temple as a 2-story building, Henry, but they did not have the wheel, most of them. Did Safavid Shah Ismail really plunder the tomb of Abu Hanfiya? I've heard that he did. He basically just decided that he was the successor to Muhammad, and that's why 12 Shia Islam has always controlled Iran ever since. If he didn't invade Russia and he didn't invade Spain, he might have been okay. Are you talking about Napoleon now? Oh, if Napoleon did invade Russia, could he have kept power? Yeah. Just like Hitler. Russia is where empires go to die. And that should have a lot of political weight for what's happening right now. See, my geopolitics, the way I look at political situations, is totally influenced by the history that has happened before. That's why, as much as I don't think this is an exact parallel to the appeasement thing, I'm leery of any appeasement of somebody like Putin, who is definitely prone to break his promises. If you've got military teeth in the game to counterbalance it, it's probably less likely that that's going to happen, which is what they're trying to do right now, which is what Ursula von der Leyen is demanding. And if they want to get anywhere, Ukraine's going to have strong military backup from the Europeans, and a basic promise that if Putin invades any part of Ukraine again, that's going to precipitate a full-on European war. Why do we have the bones of mummies and not Jesus Christ, one of the most written about people of his time? It would be really hard to identify the bones of a first-century Jewish person as Jesus. We are the only ones that fought Russia in a soft power war and won. No, the Great Game was the first Cold War. And the Russians lost the First World War, or the Second World War, whatever you want to call it. So there's that too. Aztec Empire sacrificed 80,000 people for their last king's ceremony. Most of them were from other native tribes. Mississippian Native Americans, like the Crow. I think the Crow are from there. But if European enemies didn't fight each other 2 world wars, they would have kept their colonies till now. I mean, Britain controlled like 25% of the world in the Middle East. I don't know if they would have kept all of it, but maybe some of it. His blood was discovered. That would have been interesting. Where's that from? Are you talking about the Shroud of Turin? Yes. Are you afraid of white Christian nationalism creating the Handmaid's Tale? Keep the Handmaid's Tale fiction, I guess. Did Frederick Douglass get mad at Lincoln for his view of separating blacks through colonies instead of integration? Yes, but he eventually both of them kind of came around to maybe blacks can live freely in America and have civil rights. The Maccabees War was in Jesus' time. About a century and a half before, Judas Maccabeus leads the revolution. Watch my video on Hanukkah for a full rundown of that. What was the culture Kampf between Prussia and the Catholic Church? That's cultural struggle. It was Prussia basically bucking against the Catholic Church and its influence in Germany several different times. I think it's during the time of German reunification. So the hope was that the Prussians, I believe, were Protestant. We're trying to unify a mainly Protestant Germany with several significant Catholic areas. But yeah. I don't think the Cold War was really a Cold War. There was so many proxy wars and so much money spent, I don't think that they can be considered a soft power game. That's a good hot take, but no. Yes, end of live stream. We're gonna clock out here. We went 25 minutes longer than I expected to. Let me see. Can I get through these? Oh, he's just speaking in German. Sorry, disassembly, I can't talk to you when you're speaking German. I love the German language, but I can't speak it. Did Jesus rise from the dead according to history? According to his disciples, yes. According to the historians, that's what they say the Christians claim, and so I'm going to go with that. That's what the Christians claim. If you believe that, you're 99% likely to be a Christian. If you don't believe that, you're 99% likely to not be a Christian. So, anyways, I'm going to sign off. We had a good one. I can't answer all of the questions that are left over. Hope you guys have a great rest of your days. Come back with your questions on Friday. I will be sure to answer them. I always feel bad at the end of Sundays because we can't have to wait a week. We will be back Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern for more questions and answers about history and social studies. So Jaden, Henry, hold on to those questions, and we'll be sure to talk about them on Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern, Saturday, 6 p.m. Eastern, and then our live stream lecture next Sunday. Check out the long form content Mondays and Fridays at 8, and of course our shorts. Thank you, Harry, Hars, Rodolfo, and Solomon for such a great job holding down the chat and all of that stuff.